So when Stacy asked me whether I would share my story at this event, I wondered how much time do we have again? Because like each my story would take forever. Um, my story is complex and it's beautiful and it's murky and everything in between. I have a story, I could say Zippy BC, Zippy before Christ. I have a story of Zippy after Christ. I have a story as Zippy as an immigrant in the US, Zippy as a student, Zippy as a wife, Zippy as a mom, Zippy as a coach, and Zippy, like my story is so, every story is so distinct and so different. So today I'll give you a little snippet of each of my stories, but through all these stories, what comes up, the thread that connects them all is grace. I truly am in the process of completion and perfection. What's happening? Okay. So, if you detect an accent, that's because I was raised in Nairobi, and my formative years were pretty chaotic. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom was overwhelmed and overfunctioning as she was raising 4 wild children. I went to church because it was an expectation, but I had zero interest in the things of God. The minute I left home for college was the last time I stepped into church. In those 4 years at the university, I was willful and untethered. I tried every destructive activity you can think of. I remember good-meaning people trying to talk to me about Jesus, and I was so arrogant. I remember asking them, who asked him to die for me? I still remember that, and I'm like, wow, it's just by grace that God did not strike me dead at that time. Okay, all right, good. So I asked, who asked him to die for me? I did not ask him. I was a traumatized young person. I was trying to make sense of my past because growing up in an African home, we live with our relatives. Like, I do not remember a time in my 18 years of living at home before I went to college when we did not have a random person staying in our house, in our beds, in our space. Like, we just had people all over. That's just how we live. That's how we roll in Africa. However, there was a dark, which was great, but there was a dark side to it because I was consistently sexually molested by my uncle who lived with us. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I actually spoke about this maybe 5, 6 years ago, and that's because my uncle passed away, and people were having all these good stories about him because he was a Christian man. He loved God. And I was like, what? And so when my sister had come to visit me, and I told her my struggle, and I found out that he had been molesting my sister as well, my younger sister, and we didn't know. Nobody knew. So telling me that Jesus loved me made me question where was Jesus when he could not protect young girls from this person. So that's my story before Christ. My salvation journey was just as dramatic. When I was in grad school at University of Nairobi, I met a really cool guy, Jonathan, who I became friends with. He was a Christian, he was fun. I hadn't seen Christians who are fun. He was not preachy, and he actually just embraced me and welcomed me into his group of cool kids. So I was cool now. Like cool, yeah. So anyway, he was in charge of the young adults ministry at Nairobi Chapel, which is the ministry that supports the University of Nairobi. And they used to meet, their work was meeting, they didn't meet at church because there's nowhere I was going to go to a church. But they used to meet, the young adults used to meet at a cool restaurant with fun lights and music. And then they talk just cool stuff. And they're Christians, so it was so fun. So I really started getting drawn to them. And I even started going to church with them, which was fun. And it was so different for me because that church was very, just their way of doing church was, because they catered to college kids, they did not do it wasn't preachy, it was very sciencey and very, I just enjoyed it. But I knew, and it was fun, it was so unfundamental, they didn't do altar calls. But every time I went to church, I could tell the tag, I could tell something is drawing me to this. And I knew it's just the way it. I mean, now with hindsight, I know it's the Spirit who was tagging on me, but I didn't know how to go to the next step. I didn't know, so because they don't do altar calls, so now how do you become a Christian? I did not know how to do that. So anyway, one Sunday, I remember the entire service, I cried the whole time. My heart had been burst open from whatever the pastor was preaching. But still, nobody is asking to pray for you or anything like that. So I remember going home, and I went to my bed. I went straight to my bedroom, and I just lay there. And then I put on the TV, and there was this guy on TV. I swear, can I say I swear? So he was yelling on TV. He was like, you right there, laying on your bed. You want to give your life to Christ. And he was relentless. He was not stopping. And I was like, why? Who is sleeping I'm sleeping on my bed, but he must be talking to people in hospital, because generally people don't sleep on Sunday afternoon just laying on their bed, watching him. And I don't even know, to this date, I do not know who that was. It was so weird. It was so freaky that he did. In a few minutes after I had resisted, I was kneeling in front of my TV with my hands up, praying the sinner's prayer. It was so amazing and dramatic. And after that, I don't even know who that person was. I do not know what channel that was. I was so confused. But I say my story is like for that woman at the well, who when she met Jesus, she could not stop talking about him. So that was Sunday. On Monday, I went to work and I blasted everyone on my email. I told them, I met Jesus. I met Jesus. He did this to me. I think, Mary, when you said you met Jesus and you felt such peace and joy, that's exactly how I felt. It was so freeing. I was like, my personality is very intense, so I'm either all in or not in at all. So like when I was not in Christ, I was all in the world. And now when I was like trying to tell people about Jesus, like, look what he's done. He's changed my life. I was so passionate about the things of God. And I joined the young adults ministry. I joined it so hard. I was put in the leadership. Because I could now talk to people. Like I was like, and they changed even the service. They now used to have altar calls, because I was like, there are people out there who want to meet Jesus, but they never get an opportunity. They're never called to come. So that was one of the stories that till today still makes me smile about the goodness of God. So a fun fact is I joined the young adults ministry, and that's what brought me to the U.S. I came to the U.S. as a missionary, because my church in Kenya, Nairobi Chapel, partnered with another church in Washington, D.C., and that's how they sent me here to serve, because I was all in for Jesus. I was like, you guys, everyone is going to, we are taking everyone with us. So in DC, I came to DC. I worked. I served in a city ministry. I worked with women who had been incarcerated and had recently left prison, and helped them as a career coach. I also worked with young teenage girls as a mentor and a coach. So then that's my life in the U.S. So when I got saved in the year 2000, that was still when I was in Kenya, I started journaling. I had so many prayer journals. I prayed that I could go to the US one day. I could do my PhD, and I wanted to do it debt-free. I was like, if God is who he says he is, like I really believed. I was like, I will do this. I will go to the US. I did not know anyone from the US, but I was like, I'll go to the US, I'll do my PhD debt-free. I even prayed for my husband, and I wrote my list of my husband. He was everything I knew, because, I wanted an American husband, because I'd watched enough movies, and they were very different from the Kenyan husband. So I wanted that one. So yes, that's the husband I wanted. So I prayed. I journaled fervently. I prayed for those things. But they didn't come through for a long time. That was in 2000, in 2001. I came to the US in 2004. And that, when I came to the US, when I was doing this work, it was fulfilling work, but it was a dark season in my life, even though I was doing God's work. I felt alone. I felt, unseen. Life was really hard, being in the US without your family. Even though I had the family, I had people I was working with, but it was really, really hard. So one of the other things, remember I said I wanted to do my PhD. So I remember applying for schools, and I got into all the schools I applied to in DC, but they didn't give me funding. So I was like, how is God not answering these prayers? So, but then one day I got in at, one of the schools I got in was American University. And one day when I was at the university, I met a Kenyan family. They're diplomats. They work at the embassy in DC. And I was like, I don't even have a place to stay once I go to school. And she was like, you know what? You can stay with us. And because we live in a diplomatic house, you don't have to pay us rent. We have a little baby. You can stay with her. You can watch our child for 20 hours, walk to school. And it sounded like, yes, God has answered, even though the school had not given me funding. But I was like, okay, so he's funding some things here. But I tell you, in August, when I was supposed to start school, the family was recalled back to Kenya. I had nowhere to stay. I was homeless. I really was homeless. And I was like, God, I'm in the US. I can't go home. I don't have I don't know what to do. The family I'm supposed to live with has gone. What do I do? But I tell you, there's grace. As I said, this is a story of grace. Previously, so my story is back and forth because I'm a storyteller. So previously, when I was in Kenya, when I was coming to the US, I met this American family, and they told me, oh, you're going to the US? The guy said, my mom lives in DC area. This is her number. She would love to hang out with you and have lunch with you maybe. So I never had time to do that. But then that day when I was homeless, I called her. I was like, I do not have a place to stay. And she was like, oh, Zippy, I'm in New York for the summer. I'll come back in end of September, but my house is available for you. There's nobody there. Just go get yourself comfortable, get whatever you need to do to stay there. So see, God still works. He still provided for me. So I had to cancel my enrollment at University of America because I couldn't do that. And then I started working. So the story of I don't know whether there's any person here who's an immigrant, but the story of an immigrant person in the US is very, very arduous. It's exhausting. Trying to get school fees. I was an international student. You can't get school loans. You don't get state tuitions. Anyway, that was American University. So I hustled. I worked day and night. I worked for daytime. I worked at an organization, and then in the night, I took care of some people in the night. It was hard. I say those were 3 years. Those 3 years were some of the hardest years of my life, and I remember having bad dreams then. But I call those years the dark night of the soul, and that's because. And even through that, I still see God because I had a place to stay at Betty's. And Betty, till today, when I go to DC, I have to hang out with her. She's met everybody, and she's like 85 something. She's amazing. I keep saying, you can't even believe I'm a Kenyan girl. She's very American older lady, different time zone, different years, so many different. But it's like she's my sister. She's just the best. So in 2008, so now this was after when I was doing all this work. In 2008, my girlfriend who had graduated from Bowling Green, asked me to apply for the PhD program there. I did not want to go to Ohio. Who wants to go to Ohio? So, because if you know about immigration, immigrants move to areas where they know people, where they have family or friends. You don't just go to a new place and just start. But I applied. I applied too late. So even though I was admitted, they could not give me funding again, since they had distributed their funding by March. But listen to this. In May, the head of the education department called me on a Saturday morning, and he told me, Zippy, if you're willing to come to BGSU, we've gotten a new pot of money, and we have funding for you for the entire program, and we'll pay you to do school as well. I was like, what? Yes, God does answer. He answered that prayer. He had heard my prayer. I was so excited. I don't know what you call that, but that was God. So that was God. So I moved to Ohio. Yeah. So I was the only student who was given a full tuition, a full ride. It was great. I actually absolutely loved Ohio. So yeah. So God saw me. I keep saying that was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in my eyes. So someone asked me, why are you in Detroit? So remember my prayer about my American husband? I met my American husband. He was everything on that list other than he didn't have blue eyes. So I keep telling him, you're everything but the blue eyes. So Vic, my husband, is who brought me to Detroit. So I say I came to Detroit for love. So being married and living in Detroit brought its own dynamics. I did not realize how hard it was. Just now I had graduated. I was here looking for a job. I didn't have any social capital in Detroit. I just knew my husband because we met on Match.com. Plug. Yeah. So I couldn't get job. It was so hard. My prior education was not acknowledged or recognized in the US. I was still working on my dissertation that time. And even though I spoke English, somehow either my accent, something was getting in the way. I just could not get a job. I remember also my pathway to legal status was very exhausting. So I buried a lot of my dreams. I played safe so that I could get my citizenship. I took jobs because when you're on a visa, you can't just change shake the status quo in a job because you may just be sent out. So you play small, and you hide away, like you don't push for things. So I really, for the longest time, I just played small. I was small, I was invisible, and I was safe. So that's that story. We'll put a pause on there. So Zippy as a mama. So one of my other dreams in my journal was to be a mom. I got pregnant twice, and then I lost both pregnancies. I was devastated. It was the worst. I felt incredibly lonely and small and fearful. I really needed a community, and that's when I stumbled at Grace Church. I used to do BSF here, so I've always done BSF. I've done BSF since I moved to Michigan. I used to do BSF in Toledo when I was in Ohio. So I started, because of coming to BSF group here, I saw the church and I was like, oh, it has so many, we used to come and I used to see people and I'm like, oh, I just wanted to be part of this community. And that's what brought me here. Then, because we had lost our pregnancies, I remember praying. I asked some of the elders, and Mary remembered praying for me. And I was like, we are going to pray. I tell you, I pray bold prayers. I don't play with God. I pray hard. I'm like, if you're God, then you be God. If we've lost 2 children, I want you to give me twins. That is my prayer today. And I know my husband giving me a side eye, like, I don't think that's how it works. But I was like, if God is God, then let him be God. It was such a bold prayer. And so guess what? So I went to the doctors to see a specialist to see why I was losing my pregnancies were not sticking. And on that particular day I went, they found that my HCG levels were so high, meaning either I had a multiple pregnancy or I had an ectopic pregnancy. My previous pregnancy was ectopic, so I had already lost my one tube. So they were very careful. They wanted to make sure we don't get that. So I went to they checked the tube. They were like, oh, you're good, but you have to come back because your levels are so high. I was like, I'm not pregnant. I can't be pregnant. I haven't missed my period yet, so I don't understand. And so I came back after 72 hours and they said, yes, you're pregnant, and you're pregnant with twins. I was so blown away. That is the time when I knew for real that pregnancy would stick. That pregnancy was difficult, but God was faithful. I was on bed rest for 12 weeks, but I knew without a shadow of doubt that the pregnancy would stick, and it did. We now have two beautiful daughters, Amani, which means peace, because of just the peace that God gave me when I found out I was pregnant, and Sifa, which means praise, which was my heart, my positioning was just praising God for his faithfulness. They're delightful. Many of you here know them because they've been here in this church forever. They thought church was home. So last year, time. Okay, I'll just jump to my last story. So last year during the women's retreat, I'll move fast forward. So I learned about Emmanuel journaling, and it completely changed my life. You see, my marriage by that I think because of COVID and life, it was just, we were struggling, and it was bad. But at the women's retreat, Elizabeth taught us about, hold on. Hold on. Okay, I'll skip this story just so that the time. I knew, but let me just say it real quick. We'll just have to bear with this. Otherwise, it won't make sense, the bottom part. So I often share the story of Elizabeth and Mary. When Elizabeth was pregnant with John jumped in his mom's womb because he knew, when Elizabeth met Mary, because he knew that was the Messiah. I knew Vic is a person for me. And John knew Jesus was the Messiah. But when, he even baptized Jesus, heaven opened up, said everything, heaven, he knew Jesus was the Messiah. But then when John was arrested and put in prison, he asked his disciples, because he was in such despair, he asked his disciples, go ask Jesus whether he is the Messiah or we look for another. And we know the story, how it went. He still got beheaded. So I keep saying this story because I know from how I've shared how God gave Vic to me. So I know he is my person. So even when we were in the hardest of times, I knew he's my person. But this was so hard. I was having such a hard time. So now when we went for the retreat, I found out about Emmanuel journaling, which completely shifted my mindset. Emmanuel journaling talks about gratitude. It has prompts, and you'll learn about that from Elizabeth McKee if she teaches it one time. But I clearly had God telling me that he got me and he got Vic too, and that he was able to do something about the pain that was in my marriage. That has saved my marriage. They say there's something about when you have gratitude that changes when you do Emmanuel journaling, because you're having a conversation with God, the back and forth, and God sees you, and it changes the pathways in your brain when you know that somebody's seeing you and they validate you and they are happy, they're glad you're here. And that's exactly what God told me. He was like, I am happy I see you, you're here, I got you, and I got Vic too. So don't worry about this. And that has, my heart just bursts open about my marriage. I won't go about the Emmanuel journaling. But so to wrap it up, so what is my story? So things which I can say all along, it's a story of grace, and it's a story of coming to know that God sees me. I'm here because all of my past is covered by His grace. And no matter what I've done, no matter where I've been, no matter how I fall, He picks me up again, and He has removed my shame and taken me as I am. I am justified now. I am covered by His grace. And like Hagar in the story of how Emmanuel journaling came up, God sees me and He validates me and He calls me by my name. To God be the glory. That's it.